The blood on Eleanor Jennings' hands had been scrubbed clean 3 years ago, but the stains on her reputation in Nebraska City, Nebraska, remained as vivid as the day she had pulled that trigger in 1873. She stood behind the counter of the small general store where she worked, eyes downcast as Mrs. Patterson deliberately turned her back and walked out without making her intended purchase, the bell above the door jangling like an accusation. It was September of 1876 now, and Eleanor had learned to accept these small cruelties as penance for her past, even though the judge himself had called it self-defense when her drunken husband had come at her with a knife. The law had freed her, but the people of this town had sentenced her to a lifetime of whispers and turned backs. She was 24 years old and felt ancient, her youth seemingly buried alongside the man she had killed to save her own life. The other women in town gathered their skirts when she passed, as if her mere presence might contaminate them. Mothers pulled their children close, warning them in hushed tones about the wicked woman who had murdered her husband, conveniently forgetting the bruises Eleanor had worn like ugly jewelry for 2 years of marriage, the broken arm that had healed crooked, the night Marshal Davidson had found her unconscious in her own kitchen. The afternoon sun slanted through the store windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. Eleanor was reorganizing a shelf of canned goods when the door opened again, bringing with it a gust of autumn wind and the tall figure of Blake Morrison. She had seen him around town, occasionally over the past 6 months, since he had purchased the old Henderson Ranch, 5 miles outside Nebraska City. He was a man of perhaps 30 years, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of creek water after a storm, gray-green and surprisingly gentle for someone who made his living working the harsh Nebraska plains. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to carry genuine warmth rather than the cold politeness she usually received from male customers. "Good afternoon, sir," Eleanor replied, keeping her tone professional and distant. "What can I help you find?" "I need about 50 pounds of flour, 20 of sugar, and whatever coffee you recommend," Blake said, approaching the counter with an easy stride. "Also some dried beans, salt pork if you have it, and any vegetables that will keep for a while. Winter preparations." Eleanor nodded and began gathering his order, acutely aware of his presence as he browsed the store. Most customers either rushed through their transactions with her or sent their wives in instead. Blake Morrison seemed in no particular hurry, examining items on the shelves with careful attention. "This is a well-kept store," he commented, picking up a jar of preserves to examine the label. "Everything organized sensibly." "Thank you," Eleanor said, surprised by the compliment. "I try to make sure folks can find what they need." "You do more than that," Blake said, setting the jar back precisely where he had found it. "I have been in plenty of general stores across Kansas and Nebraska, and most of them are a chaotic mess. This place has thought behind it." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, unaccustomed to praise. She focused on weighing out the flour, scooping it carefully into cloth bags. Blake came to stand across the counter from her, watching her work with an expression she could not quite read. "You are Eleanor Jennings," he said. It was not a question, but his tone held no judgment. Her hands stilled for just a moment before she continued her task. "Yes. I have heard talk about you in town," Blake continued, and Eleanor braced herself for what would come next. "Instead," he said, "seems to me people have mighty short memories about their own sins while holding tight to everyone else's." Eleanor looked up sharply, meeting his eyes for the first time. She found no mockery there, no pity either, just a straightforward honesty that made something in her chest tighten with an emotion she had almost forgotten. "People believe what they want to believe," she said quietly, returning her attention to measuring out his sugar. I suppose they do, Blake agreed. I also suppose that a woman who shoots a man who is coming at her with a knife is doing what any sensible person would do, given the choice between dying and living. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she tied off the sugar bag. You seem to know quite a bit about my business. Hard not to hear about it when the church ladies spend half their conversation warning me about the dangers of the fallen woman who works at the general store, Blake said, and there was a hint of disgust in his voice that was clearly directed at the church ladies, not at her. I told Mrs. Patterson just yesterday that I have seen real wickedness in my time, and a woman defending herself does not qualify. That is why she left without buying anything earlier, Eleanor realized, a bitter smile touching her lips. She probably did not appreciate your opinion. I imagine not, Blake said, unconcerned. But I stopped worrying about Mrs. Patterson's approval somewhere around the time she told me I should not hire Mexican workers because they were naturally lazy. I have 3 vaqueros working my ranch who outwork any 5 white men I have known. Eleanor found herself almost smiling, a real smile, not the careful neutral expression she usually wore. She tallied up his purchases, her arithmetic quick and accurate, and told him the total. Blake paid without questioning her figures, which many customers did, as if assuming she would cheat them. Would you happen to know anyone looking for work? Blake asked as she counted out his change. I could use someone with good organizational skills to help manage the household side of the ranch. I am adequate at running cattle and horses, but I cannot seem to keep a proper inventory of supplies, and my cooking would shame a cowhand. Eleanor hesitated, surprised by the offer that seemed implicit in his words. You are asking me. I am asking if you know anyone, Blake corrected gently. But yes, I would offer you the position if you were interested. It would include room and board in a separate cabin on the property and wages of $20 a month. $20 a month was generous, more than she made at the general store. But Eleanor had learned to be cautious about offers that seemed too good. Why would you want to hire me, given my reputation? Blake picked up the lighter bags of his supplies, leaving the flour for a second trip. Because I need someone competent and organized, and you clearly are both. Because I trust someone who has been through hardship to be honest about the hard realities of life. And because I think you deserve a chance to build something new, away from people who have decided to define you by one terrible night instead of the 1,000 days you survived before it, and the 1,000 more you have survived since. Eleanor stared at him, completely unprepared for such straightforward kindness. She had grown so accustomed to suspicion and judgment that genuine respect felt almost dangerous. I would need to give notice here, she heard herself say, and only realized she had accepted when she saw Blake smile. Of course, he said. Would 2 weeks be sufficient? Yes, Eleanor said, her heart beating faster with a mixture of hope and fear. Yes, 2 weeks would be fine. Blake nodded, satisfied. I will be back in town next Saturday. We can work out the details then, if that suits you. After he left, carrying his supplies out to his wagon, Eleanor stood alone in the quiet store and wondered if she had just made a wise decision or a foolish one. But then she remembered the way Blake had spoken to her, as if she were a person worthy of respect rather than an object of scorn, and she thought perhaps it did not matter. Even if the job lasted only a short while, it would be worth it to spend some time in an environment where she was not constantly reminded of her supposed shame. The owner of the general store, Mr. Hendricks, was less understanding when she gave her notice. He was a portly man with mutton-chop whiskers and a perpetual expression of mild disapproval that deepened considerably when Eleanor explained she would be leaving. "This is very sudden," he said, frowning at her across his cluttered desk in the back room. "I hired you when no one else would, girl. Thought you would show more loyalty." "I am grateful for the opportunity you gave me," Eleanor said, keeping her voice level despite her annoyance at being called girl when she was a grown woman. "But I have been offered a position that pays better and includes lodging. I need to think of my future." "Working alone at a ranch with a bachelor rancher," Mr. Hendricks said, his tone dripping with insinuation. "I am sure you will be thinking of your future, just like you did with your last husband." The unfairness of the comment stung, but Eleanor had developed a thick skin over the past 3 years. "Blake Morrison has offered me an honest job with honest wages. What I do with my life is my own business, Mr. Hendricks, just as it was my own business whether I chose to let my husband kill me or defend myself." She turned and walked out of the office before he could respond, her hands shaking with suppressed anger. For 3 years she had swallowed these casual cruelties, had accepted them as the price of survival. But something about Blake's straightforward respect had reminded her that she did not have to define herself by other people's judgments. The next 2 weeks passed slowly. Eleanor continued her work at the store, enduring the whispers and speculation that followed Blake's offer. The story had spread through Nebraska City like wildfire, growing more scandalous with each retelling. By the end of the first week, the gossips had her practically married to Blake already, living in sin at his ranch, a fallen woman leading a good man astray. Eleanor ignored it all as best she could. She had few possessions to pack, her life having been reduced to essentials after her husband's death. The small room she rented above the seamstress shop contained a narrow bed, a trunk with her clothes, a few books, and little else. She had sold almost everything she owned to pay for her husband's burial, and the lawyer who had defended her at the inquest. The law said she owed him a proper funeral, even though he had nearly killed her a dozen times before she finally stopped him. On her last day at the general store, Eleanor cleaned and organized everything with meticulous care, leaving detailed notes about inventory and suppliers for whoever would replace her. Mr. Hendricks did not thank her for the extra effort. He simply handed her the wages she was owed, shorted by $2, and told her she was lucky to have gotten that much. Eleanor took the money without arguing, too tired to fight over $2 she would never see regardless of what she said. She walked back to her room, packed the last of her belongings, and sat on the edge of her bed waiting for Saturday morning when Blake had said he would come for her. She barely slept that night, her mind churning with possibilities and fears. What if Blake was not the honorable man he seemed? What if this was an elaborate trap, some cruel joke? But then she remembered his eyes, the straightforward honesty in them, and she chose to trust her instincts. They had kept her alive this long. Blake arrived precisely at 8 in the morning, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 well-kept horses. He helped Eleanor load her trunk without comment on how light it was, how little she owned. He handed her up onto the wagon seat with courtesy, as if she were a respectable woman rather than the town scandal. As they drove out of Nebraska City, Eleanor looked back only once. The town had never been home, not really. It had been a prison, and she was finally escaping. The Morrison Ranch lay 5 miles northwest of town, accessible by a decent road that wound through rolling prairie dotted with cattle. The land had a stark beauty to it, the late September grasses gone golden in the autumn sun, the sky arching overhead in an endless blue expanse. Eleanor felt something in her chest loosen as they left the town behind, the open space offering a freedom she had not felt in years. The Henderson family ran this place for 20 years before the drought of '74 broke them, Blake explained as they drove. They let it run down pretty badly toward the end, could not afford to keep up with repairs. I bought it for a decent price last spring and have been working on bringing it back to life. Where are you from originally? Eleanor asked, curious about this man who had offered her an escape. Kansas, mostly, Blake said. My family had a farm near Fort Riley. I worked as a trail boss for a few years after the war, driving cattle from Texas up to the railheads in Kansas. Saved my money and decided I wanted to build something permanent. You served in the war? Eleanor asked. I did, Blake said, his expression growing distant. Joined up when I was 17, full of patriotic fervor and ignorance about what war actually meant. Spent 3 years learning hard lessons about violence and death. He glanced at her. That is part of why I do not judge you for what you did, Eleanor. I have killed men, more than I care to count. The difference is that people thank me for it because I wore a uniform when I did it. You were defending your life in your own home and people condemn you for it. Never made sense to me, that distinction. Eleanor absorbed this, understanding him better. The war shaped a lot of men. For better or worse, Blake agreed. I try to let it have made me more compassionate, more understanding of what people do when they are desperate or afraid. Does not always work, but I try. The ranch came into view as they crested a low hill. The main house was a solid 2-story structure built from local timber and stone, weathered but sturdy. A large barn stood nearby, freshly painted, along with several other outbuildings in various states of repair. Corrals held horses and cattle, and Eleanor could see several men working in the distance. The cabin I mentioned is just over there, Blake said, pointing to a small structure set apart from the main house, nestled near a grove of cottonwood trees. It used to be the foreman's quarters when the Hendersons ran a bigger operation. I fixed it up last month, new roof, patched the walls, added a good stove. Thought it would be better to have privacy rather than a room in the main house. Eleanor appreciated his thoughtfulness, the implicit understanding that she would want her own space, free from potential gossip or impropriety. It looks perfect. Blake helped her unload her trunk, carrying it into the cabin himself. The interior was simple but clean, with a bed frame built into one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a trunk for storage, and a cast iron stove that looked nearly new. Windows on 2 walls let in plenty of light, and someone had hung simple curtains. I am not much for decorating, Blake admitted, but I tried to make it comfortable. If you need anything else, just let me know and we will get it. This is more than adequate, Eleanor said, running her hand over the smooth wood of the table. It is wonderful, actually. Thank you. Blake nodded, looking pleased. Come up to the main house when you are settled. I will show you around, introduce you to the hands, and we can discuss your responsibilities. After he left, Eleanor stood in the center of her new home and felt tears prick her eyes. It was not much, just a single room really, but it was hers. For the first time since her husband's death, she had a space that felt safe, that no one could take from her or poison with their judgment. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses on pegs along one wall, arranging her books on a small shelf near the bed. Then she washed her face in the basin, tidied her hair, and walked up the dirt path to the main house. Blake answered her knock immediately, as if he had been watching for her. The interior of the house was decidedly masculine, with heavy furniture and minimal decoration, but it was surprisingly clean for a bachelor establishment. I do try to keep things tidy, Blake said, noticing her surprise. But I am not great at the finer points of running a household. Come on, I will show you the kitchen, which is where you will probably spend a fair amount of time trying to make sense of my terrible inventory system. The kitchen was large and well equipped, with a massive cast iron stove, plenty of counter space, and shelves lined with supplies. Or rather, shelves haphazardly stuffed with supplies in no particular order. Flour sat next to lamp oil, which sat next to a box of nails. Coffee shared space with spare bridles. It was organized chaos at best. Eleanor felt her fingers itch to sort it all properly. "I see what you mean about inventory." Blake laughed, a warm sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "It is pretty bad, I know. I keep buying things because I cannot find what I already have. Half the time I am cooking beans because I forgot I have perfectly good vegetables buried somewhere in this mess." "I can fix this," Eleanor said with more confidence than she had felt about anything in years. "It will take a few days, but I can make this functional." "That is exactly what I was hoping to hear," Blake said. "Beyond organizing the household supplies and cooking, I would appreciate help keeping track of expenses and income. I have all the records in a ledger, but my bookkeeping is not much better than my kitchen organization. And if you have time and inclination, the house could use a woman's touch. The Hendersons took all the nice curtains and decorations when they left, and I have not gotten around to replacing them." They discussed wages and expectations in detail, Blake treating her as a competent partner rather than a servant. $20 a month plus room and board, Sundays off, and an agreement that Eleanor could end the arrangement at any time if it did not suit her. He asked her input on household management, actually listened to her suggestions, and made it clear he trusted her judgment. After their discussion, Blake took her on a tour of the property, introducing her to the ranch hands. There were 6 men in total, 3 Mexican vaqueros named Diego, Carlos, and Miguel, who had worked for the Hendersons before Blake bought the place, 2 white cowboys named Jim and Frank, who Blake had hired from a ranch in Kansas, and a young man named Thomas who served as general help and was learning the ranching trade. The men greeted her with varying degrees of curiosity and politeness. Diego, the oldest of the vaqueros, gave her a courteous nod and a "señora" that held respect. Jim and Frank were more reserved, clearly uncertain about having a woman on the ranch, especially one with a reputation. Thomas, who could not have been more than 19, blushed red as a beet and stammered his greeting. "Eleanor will be managing the household and supplies," Blake told his men firmly. "She speaks with my authority on those matters. You need something, you ask her. She tells you to do something related to the house or supplies, you do it." "Understood." There was a chorus of "Yes, boss," and "See, Senor Blake," and Eleanor felt a warm gratitude for the way he established her authority from the beginning. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor threw herself into organizing the chaos of Blake's kitchen and storage areas, creating order from confusion. She cataloged every item, organized them logically, and created a detailed inventory that would make it easy to see what needed restocking. She scrubbed and cleaned, established routines, and began cooking proper meals for the household. The men were initially suspicious of the changes, but they quickly came around when they started eating Eleanor's cooking instead of Blake's attempts. She made hearty stews, fresh bread, pies from dried apples, and vegetables that actually retained flavor. Thomas declared her biscuits the best he had ever eaten, which made Blake laugh and agree. Blake himself was surprisingly easy to work with. He treated Eleanor with consistent respect, never presuming on their working relationship, never making inappropriate comments or advances. He thanked her for every meal, complimented her organizational skills, and actually implemented her suggestions for improving the ranch's record-keeping. Eleanor found herself relaxing in ways she had not in years. The work was hard but satisfying, and the isolation of the ranch meant she was blessedly free from the constant judgment of Nebraska City's residents. The hands treated her with increasing respect as they saw her competence. Even Jim and Frank, initially skeptical, warmed to her after she efficiently handled a supply crisis when a critical delivery was delayed. And she managed to stretch their existing food stores through creative cooking. The autumn deepened, October bringing cooler nights and the hard work of preparing for winter. Eleanor spent her days preserving food, organizing supplies, and managing the household with increasing confidence. She mended clothes for the hands, kept detailed books that made Blake shake his head in wonder at her neat figures, and slowly began to make the main house feel like a home rather than just a place where men slept between work shifts. She also found herself watching Blake more than she should. He was in constant motion, working alongside his men from dawn until dusk, mending fences, caring for livestock, making repairs on buildings and equipment. He was fair with his workers, patient when teaching Thomas new skills, and respectful of the vaquero's expertise. She noticed the way he always did the hardest jobs himself rather than delegating them, the way he never asked his men to do something he would not do. One evening in late October, Eleanor was working on the account books in the kitchen when Blake came in, dusty and tired from a long day of moving cattle to better grazing land. He washed up at the pump outside, then came in and poured himself coffee from the pot she always kept warm. "You are still working?" he asked, noticing the ledgers spread across the table. "Just finishing up the monthly accounts," Eleanor said. "You will be happy to know we came in under budget on supplies this month, even with the extra purchases for winter." Blake sat down across from her, cradling his coffee cup. "I do not know how I managed before you got here. Actually, I do know. I did not manage at all, I just stumbled along hoping nothing would fall apart too badly." Eleanor smiled, closing the ledger. "You managed well enough to keep the ranch running and all your men employed. That counts for something." "Maybe," Blake said, but he looked pleased by her words. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before he spoke again. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can tell me, it is none of my business if you want." Eleanor tensed slightly but nodded. "You can ask. Do you ever think about going somewhere else? Somewhere no one knows your history, starting completely fresh?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I used to think about it all the time, especially in the first year after it happened. But the truth is, I do not have the money to go far, and running away felt like admitting I did something wrong. I defended myself. That is the truth. Why should I have to hide from the truth?" "You should not," Blake said firmly. "But I understand the impulse. After the war, I thought about going west, all the way to California or Oregon just to get away from the memories. But I realized I would be carrying them with me no matter where I went." "Exactly," Eleanor said. "The only way forward is through, not around. I have to live with what I did, but I do not have to be ashamed of it. Took me a long time to understand that, and some days I still forget. But being here, working here, it helps. You treat me like I am a person, not a scandal. That makes a difference." Blake met her eyes, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. "You are a person, Eleanor. A strong, capable, intelligent person who survived something terrible. Anyone who cannot see that is a fool." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Eleanor was afraid to name. Then Blake cleared his throat and stood up, breaking the tension. "I should let you get back to work, or better yet, you should stop working for the night. It is late." "Just need to finish this one entry," Eleanor said, her voice slightly unsteady. After Blake left, Eleanor sat staring at the ledger without seeing it, her heart beating too fast. She was developing feelings for Blake Morrison, she could no longer deny it. But the thought terrified her. Her only experience with marriage had been a nightmare of violence and fear. How could she trust her judgment about men after marrying someone who had nearly killed her a dozen times before she stopped him permanently? But Blake was nothing like her late husband. Donald Jennings had been charming at first, then possessive, then violent. He had isolated her from friends and family, controlled every aspect of her life, punished her for imagined infractions with his fists. Blake, by contrast, encouraged her independence, valued her opinions, and had never shown even a hint of temper or violence in her presence. Still, Eleanor had thought Donald was a good man too at first. How could she trust her own judgment? The answer came to her slowly over the following weeks as autumn turned toward winter. She could trust herself because she was no longer the naive 18-year-old girl who had married Donald. She had survived his abuse, had found the strength to defend herself, had endured 3 years of social exile with her dignity intact. She was not the same person, and she knew what warning signs to watch for, and Blake showed none of them. As November brought the first snow, Eleanor continued to observe him carefully, watching how he handled stress, frustration, disappointment. A late blizzard killed 3 head of cattle. A equipment failure cost 2 days of work. Thomas accidentally broke an expensive tool. In each case, Blake remained calm, solving problems without blame or anger. The ranch hands clearly respected him, but more than that, they liked him. Eleanor heard them talking sometimes, not realizing she was within earshot. They spoke of Blake as a fair boss, a good man, someone who paid them honestly and treated them with dignity. Diego, who had worked for several ranchers over his 40 years, told the others that Blake Morrison was one of the best men he had known. Eleanor also noticed how Blake treated her. He never invaded her space or made her uncomfortable. He never showed up at her cabin unannounced, always respecting her privacy. He never made demands, only requests, and always prefaced them with genuine courtesy. When she suggested changes or improvements, he listened seriously and usually implemented them. One snowy evening in mid-November, Eleanor was in the main house preparing dinner when Blake came in carrying a parcel wrapped in brown paper. "This came for you when I was in town today," he said, handing her the package. "Also, Mrs. Patterson made a comment about you that I will not repeat because it was vile, and I told her she was not welcome to speak about you or any other topic in my presence going forward." Eleanor took the package, surprised. "You did not have to do that. I am used to people saying terrible things about me." "Well, you should not have to be used to it," Blake said firmly, "and I do not have to stand there and listen to it without objecting." Eleanor set the package aside to open later and returned to the stove where potatoes were boiling. "You are making enemies in town on my behalf. That is not wise." "Mrs. Patterson was never my friend," Blake said, hanging his coat by the door. "And I have no interest in being friends with anyone who takes pleasure in cruelty. There are good people in Nebraska City, and there are small-minded gossips. I will do business with both when necessary, but I only respect one group." The package turned out to be from a distant cousin in Iowa, one of the few relatives who had maintained any contact with Eleanor after her husband's death. Inside was a beautiful shawl, hand-knitted in a soft blue wool, and a letter expressing hope that Eleanor was well and managing as best she could. Eleanor showed Blake the shawl at dinner, touched by the unexpected kindness. "My cousin Martha is one of the only people from my old life who still writes to me. Her family was horrified by what happened, but she never believed the worst of me." "She is wise, then," Blake said. "That is beautiful workmanship. The color matches your eyes." Eleanor felt warmth rise to her cheeks at the compliment. Blake had never commented on her appearance before, had maintained a careful professional distance. The fact that he had noticed the color of her eyes sent a flutter through her chest that was equal parts pleasure and panic. The evening proceeded as usual, with dinner followed by Eleanor cleaning up while Blake worked on paperwork at the kitchen table. But there was a new awareness between them, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that Eleanor suspected they both felt. Winter deepened, and the ranch settled into the slower rhythms of the cold months. There was still work to be done, animals to care for and equipment to maintain, but the urgency of the spring and autumn seasons had passed. Blake spent more time in the house, working on plans for spring improvements, and Eleanor found herself in his company more often. They fell into an easy companionship, talking while she cooked or mended, while he worked on his ledgers or cleaned tack. Blake told her stories about his trail driving days, adventures that ranged from harrowing river crossings to absurd mishaps with stubborn cattle. Eleanor shared carefully edited memories of her childhood in Illinois, before she moved to Nebraska before Donald, when life had been simpler. "You never talk about your marriage," Blake observed one evening as they sat by the stove, Eleanor knitting socks for the ranch hands and Blake repairing a bridle. "There is not much good to say about it," Eleanor replied honestly. "I was 18 and thought I was in love." Donald seemed kind at first, attentive and charming. "My parents had died the previous year and I was alone, so when he proposed after 3 months of courtship, I said yes. The problems started almost immediately after the wedding." Blake's hand stilled on the bridle leather. "What kind of problems?" "He was controlling," Eleanor said, her knitting needles clicking steadily. "He wanted to know where I was every moment, who I spoke to, what I was doing. At first I thought it was love, that he just cared about me so much. But it got worse. He became convinced I was unfaithful, even though I never gave him reason to think it. He would fly into rages, accuse me of things that made no sense. And then he started hitting me." "Jesus," Blake said softly. "It escalated over 2 years," Eleanor continued, needing to tell the story to make Blake understand. "I tried to leave once, but he found me and dragged me back. Said he would kill me if I ever tried to leave again, and I believed him. So I stayed and tried to be a good wife, tried not to provoke him, but nothing I did was right. The night it happened, he came home drunk. He had been drinking more and more those last few months. He started in on me about something, I do not even remember what. I said something back, defending myself, and he went to the kitchen and got a knife." She paused, the memory still vivid despite the passage of time. "I can still see his face, the rage in it, the intention. He was going to kill me, I knew it absolutely. There was a pistol in a drawer near where I was standing. My father's gun, one of the few things I had left from him. I grabbed it and I shot him. I did not think about it, I just did it." "Of course you did," Blake said. "Anyone would have." "The marshal came, and the doctor, and they took him away," Eleanor continued. "There was an inquest. The judge ruled it self-defense because I had visible bruises, and the doctor testified I had a recently broken arm that had healed badly. But the judge's ruling did not matter to most people in town. They decided I was a murderer, a wicked woman who had killed her husband. Never mind that he had been beating me for 2 years. Never mind that he came at me with a knife. I was the one who survived, so I must be the one at fault." Blake set aside the bridle and moved to sit closer to her. "Eleanor, I am so sorry you went through that. All of it, the abuse and the aftermath. You deserved better." "Maybe," Eleanor said, blinking back tears. "But I got what I got and I survived it. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," Blake said softly. He reached out and gently took one of her hands, stilling her knitting needles. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met. What you endured, what you survived, it would have broken most people." But you are here, you are working, you are building a life. That takes incredible strength." Eleanor looked at their joined hands, his calloused and large, her smaller but equally work-worn. "Sometimes I do not feel strong. Sometimes I feel like I am just pretending, waiting for everything to fall apart again." "That is what strength really is," Blake said. "Not the absence of fear or doubt, but continuing forward despite them." They sat there for a long moment, hands joined, the quiet of the winter evening wrapped around them. Then Blake squeezed her hand gently and released it, returning to his bridle as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed, Eleanor realized. By sharing her story, by letting him see the worst of her past, she had taken a risk. And Blake had responded not with judgment or pity, but with understanding and respect. December brought deep snow and bitter cold. The ranch work contracted to essential tasks only, keeping animals fed and sheltered, maintaining pathways between buildings. The hands spent more time in the bunkhouse, repairing equipment and playing cards. Eleanor and Blake spent more time together, their companionship deepening into something that felt increasingly like courtship, though neither of them named it as such. Blake began bringing small gifts from his trips to town. Nothing ostentatious, just small things that showed he paid attention. A new cookbook when he noticed her paging through the old worn one she used. A packet of seeds for spring planting, varieties she had mentioned wanting to try. A book of poetry because she had once mentioned loving poetry as a girl. Eleanor treasured each gift, not for their material value but for what they represented. Someone was thinking of her, caring about her preferences and interests, seeing her as a person worthy of consideration. She began taking more care with her appearance, not dramatically, but in small ways. She made herself a new dress from fabric Blake had brought without her asking, a practical wool in a deep green that she knew looked well on her. She wore the blue shawl her cousin had sent, enjoying the way Blake's eyes lingered on her when she did. Christmas approached, and Eleanor decided to do something special for the ranch. She spent weeks preparing in secret, making gifts for each of the hands, practical things like knitted scarves and socks, but personalized to each man. For Blake, she made a new shirt, carefully measuring one of his old ones to get the size right, choosing a sturdy cotton in dark blue, and sewing it with tiny, precise stitches. On Christmas Eve, she invited everyone to the main house for a special dinner. She had been cooking for days, using precious supplies to make a feast. There was a roasted goose that Blake had shot, potatoes mashed with butter and cream, vegetables she had preserved from the autumn harvest, fresh bread, and 3 different pies. The men arrived cleaned up and almost shy, unused to such finery. Eleanor had decorated the house with pine boughs and candles, making it warm and festive. Blake had contributed a precious bottle of whiskey, enough for each man to have a generous glass. They ate until they could hold no more, laughing and talking, sharing stories. Diego spoke of Christmases in Mexico with his large family. Thomas talked about his mother's cooking with homesick nostalgia. Jim and Frank traded exaggerated stories about wild Christmases in various cow towns. After dinner, Eleanor brought out the gifts, embarrassed by their simplicity, but hoping they would be appreciated. The men were touchingly grateful, each thanking her profusely for the thought and effort. Miguel actually had tears in his eyes when he opened his package, saying his mother used to knit him socks just like these before she died. Blake opened his gift last, unfolding the shirt carefully. His expression as he looked at it made Eleanor's heart race. "This is beautiful work," he said quietly. "You made this." "I hope it fits," Eleanor said. "I tried to get the measurements right." "It is perfect," Blake said, meeting her eyes. Thank you, Eleanor. This means more than I can say. Later, after the hands had returned to the bunkhouse and Eleanor was cleaning up, Blake came into the kitchen carrying a wrapped package. I have something for you, he said, almost shyly. I was not sure if I should give it to you, but after tonight, after everything you did to make this Christmas special for all of us, I want you to have it. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron and took the package, which was heavier than she expected. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal, the cover tooled with an intricate floral design and an elegant fountain pen. I noticed you do not have a place to write your own thoughts, Blake said. You keep all our accounts and records so meticulously, but nothing for yourself. I thought maybe you would like to have something that was just yours. Eleanor ran her fingers over the tooled leather, overwhelmed. The gift was expensive, far more costly than was appropriate for an employer to give an employee. But it was also deeply thoughtful, showing that Blake understood her in ways no one else had bothered to try. Blake, this is too much, she whispered. No, he said firmly. It is not enough, not for what you have brought to this place, to these men, to me. Eleanor, you have transformed this ranch from a collection of buildings and animals into a home. You have given us all a sense of family, of belonging. That is worth more than any leather journal, but it is the best I could do to express my gratitude. Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes bright with tears. It is beautiful, thank you. They stood close in the warm kitchen, the candles flickering, the moments stretching between them. Blake reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Eleanor, he said softly, I need to tell you something, and I hope it does not ruin what we have built here. If you want me to stop, if you need me to maintain our professional relationship only, I will. But I cannot go into the new year without being honest with you. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. What do you need to tell me? I am falling in love with you, Blake said simply. Maybe I already have fallen, I do not know. I wake up looking forward to seeing you at breakfast. I find excuses to come back to the house just to be near you. I think about you constantly, about your strength and kindness, your intelligence, the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I am falling in love with you. Eleanor felt tears spill over, running down her cheeks. Blake, I do not know if I can be what you need. My marriage was such a disaster. What if I am broken? What if I cannot be a good wife to anyone? You are not the problem in your marriage, Blake said fiercely, cupping her face in both his hands now, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. Donald was the problem. He was violent and cruel and wrong, and what he did to you says nothing about you and everything about him. You are not broken, Eleanor. You are whole and strong and beautiful, and if you could find it in yourself to take a chance on me, I would spend the rest of my life proving to you that love does not have to be violent or cruel. It can be kind and gentle and safe. I am scared, Eleanor whispered. I know, Blake said. I am scared too. Love is always scary, always a risk. But I think you are worth the risk, and I hope I am worth the risk to you. We do not have to rush anything. We can take all the time you need. I just needed you to know how I feel. Eleanor looked into his eyes, those gray-green eyes that had shown her nothing but respect and kindness since the day they met. She thought about the man he had proven himself to be over the past 4 months, patient and fair, strong but gentle. She thought about the life she could have with him, here on this ranch that felt more like home than anywhere she had lived in years. I think I am falling in love with you too, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. It terrifies me, but I cannot deny it anymore. I want to take the risk, Blake. I want to see where this could go. Blake smiled, a brilliant expression of joy that transformed his weathered face. Can I kiss you? Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. Blake leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was tender and sweet and full of promise. It was nothing like the kisses Donald had demanded, rough and possessive and taking. This was Blake giving, offering, asking. When they pulled apart, Eleanor was crying again, but these were tears of joy rather than fear. Blake held her gently, just held her, letting her weep out years of pain and loneliness and fear. He murmured soft words of comfort, reassured her that she was safe, that he had her, that everything would be all right. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the candlelit kitchen while snow fell softly outside. It was the best Christmas Eleanor had ever known. The new year of 1877 brought changes both subtle and profound. Eleanor and Blake began courting officially, though the pace was slow and careful, dictated by Eleanor's need to build trust. Blake was endlessly patient, never pushing her beyond her comfort, always respecting her boundaries. They took walks together on Sundays, Eleanor's day off, bundled against the cold and talking about everything and nothing. Blake told her about his dreams for the ranch, expanding the cattle operation, perhaps starting a horse breeding program. Eleanor shared her own dreams, smaller and more domestic but no less important to her. She wanted a garden in the spring, vegetables and flowers both. She wanted to learn to ride properly, not just perch on a wagon seat. She wanted to feel safe enough to dream again. Blake listened to all of it, taking her dreams as seriously as his own. When he went to town, he came back with seed catalogs for her to browse. He began teaching her to ride on a gentle mare named Daisy, patient through her nervousness and celebrating her small victories. He asked her opinion on ranch decisions, valuing her perspective. The ranch hands noticed the change in their relationship, but if they gossiped about it, Eleanor never heard it. Diego in particular seemed pleased, telling Eleanor one day that it was good to see Blake happy, that the rancher had been lonely for too long. "He is a good man, Senora," Diego said in his careful English. "He will treat you well." "I know," Eleanor said, and meant it. But not everyone was pleased. In February, Blake returned from town with a black expression and bruised knuckles. "What happened?" Eleanor asked, alarmed. "I ran into your former landlord, Mrs. Hutchins," Blake said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "She made some comments about us that I will not repeat. I should have walked away, but when she called you a whore, I lost my temper. I did not hit her," he added quickly, seeing Eleanor's face. "But I told her exactly what I thought of her and people like her, and her son took offense. We had words that became physical. The marshal broke it up before it got too serious." Eleanor felt sick. "Blake, you cannot get into fights over me. I am not worth ruining your reputation." "Yes, you are," Blake said firmly. "And my reputation can survive a dust-up with that fool." "But Eleanor, there is something else," he hesitated. "Mrs. Hutchins told me that Donald's brother is coming to town. She seemed to think I should be warned about it." Eleanor felt ice form in her stomach. "Robert is coming here. Why?" "I do not know," Blake said. "But I wanted you to know so you could prepare yourself. If he causes trouble, I will handle it." "Robert always blamed me for Donald's death," Eleanor said, sinking into a chair. "He refused to believe Donald was abusive. He said I must have provoked him, that I was a liar and a murderer. He tried to get the judge to rule it murder instead of self-defense, brought witnesses who lied about my character." Blake knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "He cannot hurt you now. I will not let him near you if you do not want to see him." "He has a legal right to come to Nebraska City," Eleanor said dully. "I cannot stop him." "But he does not have a right to harass you," Blake said. "If he threatens you or tries to intimidate you, I will involve the marshal. You are not alone in this, Eleanor. You have me. You have the ranch hands. You have friends now, even if you do not realize it. Robert Jennings arrived in Nebraska City 3 days later. Eleanor heard about it from Blake, who had sources in town that kept him informed. Robert was staying at the hotel and apparently telling anyone who would listen that he had come to see justice done for his brother's murder. Eleanor waited tensely for the confrontation she knew would come. It happened on a Saturday when Blake had gone to town for supplies. Eleanor was in the main house, baking bread, when she heard a horse approach. She looked out the window and saw a man she recognized despite the years that had passed since she last saw him. Robert Jennings looked older, more weathered, but his expression was the same, cold and judgmental. He dismounted and strode toward the house with the aggressive confidence of a man who believed himself in the right. Eleanor considered not answering the door, but that felt cowardly. Whatever Robert had to say, she would face it head-on. She wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and opened the door before he could knock. "Robert," she said coolly. "Eleanor," he replied, his lip curling. "Or should I call you Mrs. Jennings, although I suppose you never deserved that name given how you treated my brother. What do you want?" Eleanor asked, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I want to know how you sleep at night," Robert said, his voice full of venom. "How you can live with yourself after murdering Donald in cold blood. How you can move on and play house with some rancher like you did not kill your husband." "I defended myself from a man who was going to kill me," Eleanor said. "The judge ruled it self-defense. If you have evidence otherwise, you should take it to the marshal." "The judge was wrong," Robert spat. "Donald never hurt you. You always were a liar, making up stories to make yourself look like a victim. You probably nagged him and pushed him until he had no choice but to discipline you, and then you shot him like the vicious thing you are." Eleanor felt anger rise to join her fear. "Is that what you tell yourself? That your brother beating me unconscious was discipline? That breaking my arm was somehow my fault? I have scars, Robert. I have healed bones that set wrong because Donald would not let me see a doctor. I have nightmares about the night he came at me with a knife. You can call me a liar all you want, but it does not change the truth. You seduced him, trapped him in marriage, and then killed him when he became inconvenient," Robert said. "And now you have moved on to your next victim. Does he know what kind of woman you really are? Does he know about your temper, your vindictiveness?" "I know exactly what kind of woman she is," came Blake's voice from behind Robert. Eleanor had not heard him ride up. He must have returned earlier than expected. "She is strong and kind and honest, and she survived your brother's abuse with her humanity intact. Now you need to leave my property." Robert spun to face Blake, his hand moving toward his hip where Eleanor suddenly noticed he wore a pistol. Blake noticed too, his own hand dropping to his gun. "Do not even think about it," Blake said, his voice cold as winter ice. "You are on my land, threatening a woman under my protection. You draw that gun and I will put you down and be completely within my rights." "Your protection?" Robert laughed harshly. "You are harboring a murderer." "I am protecting a woman who defended herself from a violent man," Blake corrected. "Now leave. You are not welcome here, and if you come back, I will have you arrested for trespassing." "This is not over," Robert said, but he backed toward his horse, his eyes darting between Blake and Eleanor. "Yes, it is," Blake said. "Your brother is dead. He died because he tried to kill his wife and she had the courage to stop him. You need to accept that and move on. Eleanor has paid enough for the crime of surviving." Robert mounted his horse, giving them both a look of pure hatred. "You will regret this," he said to Eleanor. "Both of you will regret this." He spurred his horse and rode off, leaving Eleanor shaking. Blake came to her immediately, pulling her into his arms. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I think so," Eleanor said, her voice muffled against his chest. Blake, I am so sorry. I never wanted to bring this kind of trouble into your life. You did not bring it, Blake said firmly. He did. And he does not frighten me, Eleanor. Bullies like Robert Jennings are all bluster. He will make noise and threats, but he will not follow through because he knows he has no legal standing. But Blake was wrong. Robert did follow through, just not in the way any of them expected. 2 days later, Blake received a notice that Robert had filed a lawsuit against Eleanor, claiming she owed him restitution for Donald's death as the deceased's next of kin. The amount he was claiming was absurd, more money than Eleanor could make in 10 years. This is harassment, Blake said angrily, reading the legal document. Pure harassment. He knows you do not have this kind of money. He is just trying to hurt you. Eleanor felt numb, staring at the paper as if it were a snake. He is going to destroy me. Even if I win the lawsuit, the legal fees will ruin me. I will have to leave, find work somewhere else, start over again. No, Blake said. You will not have to do any of that. I will pay for a lawyer, a good one from Omaha if necessary. Blake, I cannot ask you to do that, Eleanor protested. You are not asking, I am offering, Blake said. Eleanor, I meant what I said at Christmas. I love you. I am not going to stand by and watch Robert Jennings destroy you over his brother's sins. We will fight this together. This could cost you everything, Eleanor said desperately. Your reputation, your business relationships, your money. Is fighting this really worth it? Blake took her face in his hands, making her look at him. You are worth it. You are worth everything to me. We are going to fight this, and we are going to win, and then we are going to live our lives without fear or shame. Do you trust me? Eleanor searched his eyes and found nothing but determination and love. Yes, she whispered. I trust you. Blake hired a lawyer from Omaha, a sharp man named Edmund Price, who specialized in defending women against spurious legal claims. He traveled to Nebraska City to meet with Eleanor and Blake, taking detailed notes about her marriage and the circumstances of Donald's death. This case is nonsense, Edmund said bluntly after hearing the full story. Robert Jennings has no legal basis for his claim. Self-defense absolves you of any liability, and the judge's ruling at the inquest is legally binding. I can get this dismissed, but it will take time and it will not be pleasant. Robert will try to drag your reputation through the mud. My reputation is already in the mud, Eleanor said. I can survive it. You should not have to, Edmund replied, but I admire your courage. We will need witnesses to testify about the abuse you suffered and about the night of the shooting. I assume the marshal and the doctor who examined you are still in Nebraska City. They are, Blake confirmed. I will speak to them about testifying. The next few months were difficult. The lawsuit became the talk of Nebraska City, with public opinion divided. Some, particularly those who had witnessed Donald's violence or heard Eleanor's cries through thin boarding house walls, spoke in her defense. Others, including Mrs. Patterson and her circle, declared it proof that Eleanor had always been a murderer who had manipulated the legal system. Blake stood by Eleanor through all of it, accompanying her to legal meetings, defending her publicly, and never wavering in his support. The ranch hands also rallied around her. Diego made a point of coming into town with Blake and standing visibly at his side, his presence a statement of solidarity. Thomas told anyone who would listen that Miss Eleanor was the kindest person he knew, and anyone who said different could answer to him. Even some townspeople Eleanor had thought hated her came forward to help. Marshal Davidson provided a detailed deposition about the abuse he had witnessed and the evidence of self-defense he had found at the scene. Dr. Mulligan, who had examined Eleanor after the shooting, and several times before when Donald's beatings had been particularly severe, submitted medical records and testimony that painted a horrifying picture of systematic abuse. The trial was held in April, presided over by a circuit judge visiting from Lincoln. Eleanor sat in the courtroom, Blake beside her, and listened to her life being dissected and judged. Robert's lawyer tried to paint her as a seductress who had trapped Donald and then killed him when she grew tired of him. But Edmund Price was better, methodically presenting evidence of Donald's violence, Eleanor's injuries, and the clear circumstances of self-defense. Marshal Davidson testified about finding Eleanor unconscious after one beating, her face so swollen he barely recognized her. Dr. Mulligan presented records of broken bones, split lips, and bruises in patterns consistent with being struck repeatedly. Neighbors testified about hearing Donald's drunken rages and Eleanor's screams. By the time Edmund rested his case, Robert's lawyer looked defeated. The judge took less than an hour to deliberate before dismissing Robert's lawsuit with prejudice, meaning it could never be filed again. He added a sharp rebuke, stating that using the legal system to harass a victim of domestic violence was unconscionable, and that Robert should be ashamed of himself. Eleanor wept with relief as Blake held her in the courtroom. It was over, truly over. Robert left town the next day, and Eleanor felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Spring came to the ranch with a burst of green growth and new life. Eleanor threw herself into planting her long-dreamed-of garden, working the soil and planting seeds with a joy she had not felt in years. Blake helped her build raised beds and a fence to keep out deer and rabbits, working alongside her in the warm spring sunshine. Their relationship deepened through this period of working side by side, the easy companionship maturing into something profound and enduring. Blake proposed on a beautiful May evening, kneeling in her newly planted garden with a simple gold band. "I know you have reason to fear marriage," he said. "I know you have every right to be wary. But Eleanor, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. I want to spend my life with you, building this ranch together, growing old together, facing whatever comes together. Will you marry me?" Eleanor looked at this good man kneeling before her, this patient, kind, honest man who had stood by her through the worst and never wavered. She thought about the girl she had been at 18, naively accepting a proposal from a man she barely knew. She was not that girl anymore. She was a woman who had survived terrible things, who had learned what real love looked like, who knew the difference between control and care. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you." They married in June in a simple ceremony at the ranch, surrounded by the hands and a few friends from town, the good people who had defended Eleanor during the trial. Diego's wife served as witness, and Thomas gave Eleanor away with proud tears in his young eyes. Eleanor wore a new dress in pale blue, and Blake wore the shirt she had made him for Christmas. It was everything her first wedding had not been. Instead of fear and uncertainty, there was joy and confidence. Instead of isolation, there was community. Instead of a man who wanted to own her, there was a man who wanted to partner with her. Their wedding night was tender and careful, Blake attuned to every moment of Eleanor's hesitation or fear, ready to stop if she needed him to. But Eleanor found that with Blake, intimacy was not something to be endured but something to be shared, an expression of love rather than an assertion of power. Blake was patient and gentle, and Eleanor discovered that her body was not broken, that she was capable of pleasure and joy. The first year of their marriage was a process of learning and growth. Eleanor had moments of panic, times when Blake's raised voice in frustration at a broken tool would send her spiraling into fear before she remembered that Blake was not Donald, that anger and violence were not synonymous. Blake learned to recognize these moments and give her space, never taking offense at her occasional need for distance. They learned to communicate, really communicate, about their needs and fears and hopes. Blake learned that Eleanor needed warning before being touched, that surprising her from behind could trigger panic. Eleanor learned that Blake's occasional quietness was not anger, but simply his way of thinking through problems. By their first anniversary, they had built something solid and real. The ranch was thriving, the cattle operation expanding as Blake had hoped. Eleanor's garden produced abundantly, and she spent happy hours preserving food and experimenting with new recipes. She had also begun teaching Thomas to read and write in the evenings, discovering that she had a gift for teaching. It was during this time that Eleanor realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of joy and terror. She had never wanted to bring a child into her first marriage, had been grateful that no pregnancy resulted from Donald's violent attentions. But a child with Blake was different. This would be a child born from love, raised in safety. She told Blake one evening after dinner, nervous despite knowing he would be happy. He was. His face lit up with a joy so pure it made her cry, and he held her gently, already protective of the life growing inside her. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "Eleanor, we are going to be parents. Are you ready for that?" she asked, still anxious. "With you?" "I am ready for anything," Blake said. The pregnancy was not easy. Eleanor suffered from severe morning sickness in the early months and anxiety throughout. She worried constantly that something would go wrong, that she would prove unable to be a good mother, that her past would somehow poison her future. Blake was endlessly patient, reassuring her, caring for her, taking over more of the household work as she grew larger and more uncomfortable. Dr. Mulligan attended her throughout the pregnancy, his manner professional but kind. He had become a quiet ally after his testimony at the trial, treating Eleanor with the respect she deserved. In February of 1878, after a long labor, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James, after Blake's father, with the middle name Thomas after the young man who had become like family to them. Baby James had Blake's eyes and Eleanor's dark hair, and he was the most perfect thing Eleanor had ever seen. She cried the first time she held him, overwhelmed by the fierce love she felt, the absolute determination that this child would never know violence or fear. Blake cried too, holding his wife and son with gentle reverence. "Look what we made," he whispered. "Look at this perfect little person." Motherhood transformed Eleanor in ways she had not anticipated. The fierce protectiveness she felt for James helped her finally forgive herself for what she had done to survive. She had killed a man, yes, but she had also saved herself, and that salvation had led to this, to Blake and the ranch and this precious child. Her survival had meaning and purpose. The ranch hands were endlessly entertained by baby James. Diego, whose own children were grown, became an honorary grandfather, carving little toys for the baby. Thomas was fascinated by the infant, asking endless questions about babies and childcare. Even the more taciturn cowboys found themselves smiling at James's gurgles and coos. As James grew from infant to toddler, Eleanor found herself healing in deeper ways. Watching her son learn to walk and talk, seeing his personality emerge curious and cheerful and fearless, she understood that the cycle of violence Donald had brought into her life had truly ended. James would grow up knowing that men could be gentle and kind, that fathers protected rather than terrorized. He would see his parents disagree and work through conflicts with words rather than fists. He would learn that love was patient and soft and safe. When James was 2 years old, Eleanor became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to do, her mind less anxious. In the spring of 1880, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Blake's mother. Sarah was a calm baby where James had been fussy, seeming to observe the world with quiet contentment. "We are quite a family now," Blake said, holding baby Sarah while James climbed on his lap, demanding attention. "Yes, we are," Eleanor agreed, her heart full. The years that followed were rich and full. James and Sarah grew into healthy, happy children, free and safe. The ranch prospered, becoming known throughout Nebraska for quality cattle and horses. Eleanor's garden expanded, and she began selling her preserves and vegetables at the market in Nebraska City, earning her own income that gave her pride and independence. The town's attitude toward Eleanor had gradually shifted. It was impossible to maintain animosity towards someone who had been so thoroughly vindicated by the trial, and Eleanor's obvious happiness and respectability as Blake's wife made her harder to villainize. She would never be embraced by the Mrs. Pattersons of the world, but the majority of townspeople came to treat her with civility if not warmth. More importantly, Eleanor found she no longer cared what those people thought. She had Blake, her children, the ranch hands who had become family, and a growing circle of genuine friends. She had peace and safety and purpose. The opinions of small-minded gossips could not touch her anymore. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1886, Blake took Eleanor on a picnic to a beautiful spot on the ranch, a rise overlooking the creek where cottonwoods grew tall and the grass was soft. James, now 8 and Sarah, now 6, played nearby, chasing butterflies and splashing in the shallow water. "Do you remember when we met?" Blake asked, lying beside Eleanor on the blanket, their hands intertwined. "Of course," Eleanor said. "I remember thinking you were either remarkably kind or remarkably foolish to hire me." "I was remarkably lucky," Blake corrected. "You transformed my life, Eleanor. Before you, I had a ranch and work and not much else. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to build something lasting. You gave me everything." "You gave me everything," Eleanor said. "You gave me a second chance, Blake. You saw past my mistakes and my history to the person I could be. You believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. You saved me." "We saved each other," Blake said softly, pulling her close. "That is what love does. It saves us, heals us, makes us whole." Eleanor rested her head on Blake's shoulder, watching their children play, and knew he was right. She had been shunned for her past, condemned for the act of surviving. But Blake had seen something different. He had seen her strength, her resilience, her capacity for love. He had seen not the darkness of her past, but the brightness of her potential future. And together, they had built that future, day by day, choice by choice. They had built a life of love and safety, of joy and purpose, of children and laughter and hard work and deep contentment. They had built everything that Eleanor had once thought impossible for herself. As the sun began to set, painting the Nebraska sky in shades of gold and rose, Eleanor felt a profound gratitude for the path her life had taken. The journey had been hard, full of pain and struggle. But it had led her here, to this moment, to this family, to this man who had taught her that love could be gentle and that forgiveness could be a gift rather than a burden. She had been shunned for her past mistakes, but Blake Morrison had seen beyond them. He had seen her beautiful future, and he had helped her build it. And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to truly live without shame or fear, surrounded by love. James ran up to them then, Sarah close behind, both children flushed and happy from their play. "Papa, Mama, come look at the tadpoles we found," James shouted with boyish enthusiasm. Blake stood and pulled Eleanor to her feet, and together they followed their children to the creek's edge. Eleanor watched Blake crouch down to examine the tadpoles seriously, explaining to Sarah how they would grow into frogs, and felt her heart swell with love so fierce it almost hurt. This was her life now. Not the tragedy of her first marriage, not the shame and ostracism that had followed, but this. This laughter and sunshine, these children and this man, this land and this home. She had survived the worst and found her way to the best, and she was finally, completely, joyfully free. As they walked back to the house as the evening shadows lengthened, James and Sarah running ahead while Blake's arm stayed warm around Eleanor's waist, she thought about the woman she had been when she first arrived at this ranch. That woman had been broken and fearful, convinced she would never deserve happiness. Eleanor was grateful for her now, for her courage in accepting Blake's offer, for her willingness to take a chance on hope. That scared woman had taken the first steps on a journey that led to this abundant life, and Eleanor honored her bravery. The ranch house came into view, lights glowing warm in the windows. Eleanor had made those curtains, had chosen the color to paint the shutters, had planted the rose bushes that now climbed the porch railings. She had made this place a home through countless small acts of love and care. Inside, the kitchen that had once been Blake's chaotic bachelor domain was now the warm heart of their family life. Eleanor cooked dinner while Blake helped the children wash up, their cheerful chatter filling the rooms. They ate together at the table Blake had built himself, sturdy and large enough for their growing family. After dinner, after the children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Blake and Eleanor sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The night air was soft and sweet with the scent of Eleanor's roses. "I have been thinking," Blake said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Thomas has been hinting that he would like to buy some land nearby, start his own small ranch. I thought we might help him with the down payment, as a way of thanking him for all his years of loyal work." Eleanor smiled, not surprised by Blake's generosity. "I think that is a wonderful idea. Thomas has become like family. I would love to see him settled with his own place." "And Diego is getting older," Blake continued. "I thought we might build a small house on the property for him and his wife, so they do not have to live in town. He could semi-retire, help out as much or as little as he wants." "You have a good heart, Blake Morrison," Eleanor said, taking his hand. "I learned from the best," Blake replied, raising her hand to his lips. They sat together in the peaceful evening, two people who had both known hardship and found their way to happiness. Eleanor thought about the long path she had walked, from naive girl to abused wife to shunned woman to the person she was now, confident mother and beloved wife. She had made mistakes, yes. She had married the wrong man, had trusted when she should have been cautious. But she had also survived, had endured, had fought for her life and won. And those experiences, as painful as they were, had shaped her into someone stronger and wiser. Blake had seen that strength when others saw only scandal. He had valued her when she was deemed worthless. He had loved her when she was called unlovable. And in doing so, he had helped her reclaim herself, helped her build a future that honored her past without being defined by it. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations, challenges overcome and joys shared. James grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's sense of justice and his mother's quiet strength. Sarah became a spirited girl who loved books and horses in equal measure. 2 more children followed, twin boys born when Eleanor was 33, named Daniel and Michael after no one in particular, just names they both liked. The ranch continued to prosper under Blake's management and Eleanor's organizational skills. They expanded their land holdings, built new barns, and developed a reputation for fair dealing that brought them respect throughout Nebraska. Thomas did indeed buy land nearby with Blake's help, and his small ranch did well. Diego and his wife moved into the cottage Blake built for them, and Diego spent his remaining years teaching young ranch hands the vaquero skills he had learned in his youth. Eleanor's past gradually became just that, the past. New people moved to Nebraska City who knew nothing of her history. The old gossips aged and died, taking their judgments with them. Eleanor became known simply as Blake Morrison's capable wife, the woman with the beautiful garden and the happy children. But Eleanor never forgot where she had come from, what she had survived. When a young woman came to town in 1890, clearly running from something, with bruises barely concealed by powder, Eleanor reached out to her. She offered work, offered sanctuary, offered the same chance that Blake had once offered her. The woman's name was Catherine, and she had fled an abusive husband in Iowa. Eleanor helped her find lodging, helped her find work, and when Catherine's husband tracked her down and tried to force her to return, Eleanor stood beside her at the legal proceedings that followed. She used her own story to help Catherine, speaking publicly for the first time in years about what she had endured and how she had survived. It was healing, Eleanor found, to use her painful past to help someone else. Catherine reminded her of herself at 24, scared and shamed and certain she did not deserve better. Eleanor could offer her the same gift Blake had offered, the assurance that survival was not shameful, that defending yourself was not wrong, that a future of peace and happiness was possible. Catherine eventually left Nebraska City to start fresh in Colorado, but she wrote to Eleanor for years afterward, grateful letters telling of her new life, her work as a teacher, eventually her marriage to a kind man who reminded her of Blake. Eleanor treasured these letters, proof that the cycle of helping could continue, that one act of kindness could ripple outward in ways you could never fully measure. As Eleanor entered her 40s, her children growing toward adulthood, she sometimes reflected on the strange path her life had taken. If Donald had not been violent, if she had not been forced to kill him in self-defense, if the town had not shunned her, she might never have accepted Blake's offer. She might have stayed in Nebraska City, might have remarried someone respectable but unremarkable, might have lived a small, confined life. It was a troubling thought, that something so terrible had led to something so good. Eleanor did not believe that the abuse was somehow worth it because it led her to Blake. The suffering had been real and wrong and unjust, but she could acknowledge that she had transformed that suffering into something meaningful, that she had refused to let violence define her future. Blake, now in his 50s, had aged into a distinguished maturity, his hair silver at the temples but his eyes still bright with warmth and humor. He still worked the ranch, though he had hired a younger foreman to handle more of the physical labor. He spent more time with Eleanor and the children, teaching his sons the ranch work, encouraging Sarah's education, playing with the twins who at 10 years old were full of mischief and energy. On a crisp autumn evening in 1891, the whole family gathered for dinner to celebrate Blake and Eleanor's 15th anniversary. The house was full of noise and laughter, the table crowded with family and friends. James, now 13 and growing tall, gave a toast to his parents that was both funny and touching. Sarah played piano afterward, a skill she had developed with dedicated practice. The twins performed a comedy routine that had everyone laughing. Eleanor looked around the table at these faces she loved, this family they had built, and felt overwhelming gratitude. She caught Blake's eye across the table and saw her own emotion reflected there. Later, when the guests had gone and the children were in bed, Blake and Eleanor stood together in their bedroom, the room they had shared for 15 years. "You ever regret it?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "Taking a chance on me, dealing with all the gossip and trouble I brought into your life." Blake turned to her, his expression serious. "Eleanor Morrison, I have never regretted a single moment with you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me a family, a real home, a purpose beyond just working and surviving. You made me better than I was. So no, I do not regret taking a chance on you. I only regret that you had to suffer so much before we found each other." Eleanor moved into his arms, fitting against him as naturally as breathing. "I love you, Blake. I think I will love you until the day I die and probably beyond." "Good," Blake said, his voice rough with emotion, "because I plan to love you for at least that long." They stood together in the quiet of their room, two people who had chosen each other, who had built something lasting and good from difficult circumstances. Eleanor thought about all the years ahead, growing old together, watching their children grow and have families of their own, continuing to build the life they had started 15 years ago when Blake had walked into that general store and seen past her reputation to the person beneath. The future stretched before them, full of possibility and promise. There would be challenges ahead, certainly. Life always brought difficulties, but Eleanor knew they would face them together, partners in every sense of the word. She had been shunned for her past mistakes, condemned for the act of surviving, written off as damaged and worthless. But Blake Morrison had seen something different. He had seen strength and resilience, courage and capacity. He had seen not what she had done, but who she was and who she could become. And together, they had proven that everyone deserves a second chance, that the past does not have to dictate the future, that love can heal even the deepest wounds. They had built a beautiful life, full of love and laughter, hard work and deep contentment. As Eleanor drifted off to sleep that night in Blake's arms, safe and loved, she thought about the frightened woman she had been when she first came to this ranch. She wished she could tell that woman that everything would be all right, that the pain would fade, that happiness was possible. But perhaps that woman had known, deep down, when she accepted Blake's offer. Perhaps she had recognized the chance for what it was, a lifeline thrown to someone drowning, an opportunity to become who she was always meant to be. Eleanor's last thought before sleep claimed her was one of profound peace. She had survived the worst that life could throw at her, and she had emerged stronger. She had found love that healed rather than hurt, safety that was real rather than conditional, acceptance that was complete rather than grudging. She had found her home, her family, her place in the world. And it was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined in those dark days when survival was all she could manage. The forgiving rancher had indeed seen her beautiful future, and together they had made it real.